Hello everybody, welcome. This is a joint session between Jacksonville Salesforce Saturday group and the Atlanta Salesforce Saturday group. And today we are going to talk about process builder to flow conversion. And my name is Andy Utkan, and I'm the leader for Jacksonville Salesforce Saturday. How should I define myself? I'm a self-proclaimed flow evangelist. That's how I call myself once in a while. So I put out a lot of content about flows. I have a YouTube channel and I published the Udemy class for flows. I'm going to drop the links for you in the chat for those, and my Twitter handle for your questions. And today we are doing this session with Michelle together. So I'm going to hand it over to Michelle. Hello, Michelle.
Yep, so my name is Michelle Burra. I help lead the Salesforce Saturday in Atlanta, and just so super excited and thankful that Andy let us join this time, because just had a speaker back out at the last minute and didn't have time myself to prepare something. And our awesome Brenda Glasser from Atlanta is also presenting, and I was like, what better way than for our group to support Brenda and also hear about some awesomeness in how to convert processes into flow. So happy to see all of you guys and see a lot of new faces. I always love when we can join forces like this with another Salesforce Saturday group. So thank you so much, Andy, for having us and welcoming us. And yeah, let's just get started then. I think we're all super excited to hear from Brenda. I think this has been a really cool, interesting topic. People have been talking about. I know there's like concerns in regards to if we have, should we put all our processes into flow now? Is it important and whatnot? How do we do that? So I think this is going to be a really awesome session. So Brenda is going to be the presenter today, and her and Andy worked on this, organizing it. So thank you guys. And she's been in the Salesforce ecosystem, I don't know, maybe a decade now, but she's my hero. And so I always love hearing her talk, just a lot of great information from her. So also, if you hadn't known, her birthday was this past week, so definitely wish her some happy birthday wishes. Hopefully we'll get to celebrate soon. So Brenda, take it away.
Thanks so much, Michelle. I'm not exactly happy about having a birthday.
You're like 27, right? Like
having a little mini identity existential crisis, but it's okay. It is all good. Age is just a number. So awesome. So I guess I will share my screen, and let's see how this goes. I'm going to move this guy over here, and I'm going to go into present mode. And does everything look good?
Looks good.
All right.
Well, I wanna take a moment to thank Brenda. She has done quite some work to prepare for this, and this is actually a very, very good opportunity for everybody else to understand how it is like to go through this conversion, because it is quite comprehensive and quite involved process. And you can ask your questions as we go through, and you can interrupt us, no problems with that. So if we get stuck too long on a certain topic, we might defer it for later. And if you are a starter, a new beginner, please listen in. It's going to be beneficial for you. You might not understand everything, but toward the end, we are going to also give you some tips about learning new topics and also how to prepare for your certifications. And if you're not comfortable interrupting with voice, please drop your questions in chat. I'm going to be monitoring chat window. Thank you very much, Brenda. Take it away, please. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Andy. Okay, so let's see if I can get my presentation to work. Okay, cool. Michelle very kindly introduced me, but just a little bit more about me. My name is Brenda Glasser. I am located a little bit northeast of Atlanta. My current role is I am the Salesforce lead at Lambda School. So Lambda School is a really cool organization. We are a kind of like a coding boot camp, but we offer courses in full stack web development, data science. We are launching a backend development program in partnership with Amazon. And then we are also now in the process of starting to put together a program on blockchain. And the cool thing about Lambda School is you don't pay anything for tuition until after you get a job in the field making at least $50,000 a year or more. So it really makes launching into a tech career really accessible for a lot of people. So I'm really excited to work there. I hope someday maybe we'll do a Salesforce program, but not quite yet. I have been in the ecosystem for, I think, 12 years. I'm trying to always remember when's the first time I logged into Salesforce, but I think it was about 12 years ago. I have played lots of roles within the ecosystem. I have 16 certifications, and on Twitter, I'm at Brenda Glasser. It's been my goal this year to like become more active on social. It doesn't come naturally to me, but I'm trying. Other things about me, I am a co-leader along with Michelle and a guy named Jared of the Atlanta Administrators User Group. I'm a mom. I have 2 kids. My son is 14, started high school this year, and my daughter is 10. She's in 5th grade this year. One thing fun that happened this week is my cat is now the official, unofficial, official cat of Salesforce. So I'm excited about that. Outside of Salesforce, I like cooking, baking, and eating, and reading nerdy books. And my big pet peeve is Salesforce job postings that require a 4-year degree. And even worse if that degree has to be computer science. So I'm like big into like, hey, you know, you don't need to have a college degree to be successful in the Salesforce ecosystem. So trying to change that just in the teeny tiny way that I can. Cool. Okay, so let's talk about going with the flow. So flow, if you are brand new to the Salesforce ecosystem, flow is a really robust and really powerful automation tool that lets you, automate a lot of processes within Salesforce using declarative functionality or using clicks, not code. So it was first introduced, I don't know, maybe 7 years ago. And since that time, it has just really expanded. And with each release, Salesforce is just adding more and more and more capabilities onto Flow. And as they are increasing the capabilities of Flow, what we're starting to see is there are few, if any, enhancements to some of the other automation tools within Salesforce, such as Process Builder or workflow rules. So for example, with the Winter 22 release that is coming up here, I don't remember the exact date of the release, which is terrible, but some things that have been lacking with Flow, such as the ability to do an outbound message, and then the ability to launch subflows within a record triggered flow will be available. And I know those are 2 big reasons that a lot of people have not been able to maybe go through this process of transitioning existing automations into Flow, is because we had some limitations still available. But with this next release, like I feel like a lot of those limitations are now addressed. And so it's just like more and more becoming obvious that Flow is the way to go. And what I think is really interesting is, today's topic is really focused on moving declarative automation into Flow. So we'll be talking a lot about Process Builder, a little bit about workflow rule, but with the expanding capabilities of Flow, for our developer friends, there's now also opportunities to maybe move functionality that is currently within Apex code into Flow also, either fully or partially. And I think one thing is, like, regardless of kind of what it is, like Salesforce does 3 releases a year. So it is always a best practice to consistently evaluate and incorporate what are newer features of Salesforce into your org. Because what we want to do is be able to, one, take advantage of those new features, and then we want to make sure that our Salesforce orgs are scalable, and that, you know, as we go on, like that we can continue to support our business and our users. Okay, so all that being said, I do want to clarify that it's not an emergency. So there has not been any announcement or a timeline for the sunset of either workflow rule or process builders. So this is not like a, oh no, we better get this ready to go and go through this huge effort by next year or something like that. That is not the case. There has not been an announcement of that. So that's good, because we have the opportunity to really take our time and do this process in the best way possible. And just another thing, like if within your org you have workflow rules or process builders and they are working for you, that's fine. Like you can keep them working for you, and there is, again, no rush to move those into Flow. Sorry, I need to close my text messages real quick. Cool. So before we kind of jump into what the process would be to move our process builders into Flow or our workflow rules, I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the limitations of those tools. So workflow rules, if you are not familiar, are kind of like the OG Salesforce automation that we could do with clicks versus code. So you know, they haven't been really updated in a long time. Some limitations of those workflow rules: they can only execute on a single record at a time. They can only operate on a single object, so you can't have any, like, if an account is updated, go and make some update to a contact. Like, that is not an option within workflow rules. And they can only do four actions. You can do a field update, and again, that's going to be only on the object that your workflow rule fired. So if I have a workflow rule on account, I could do a field update on account, but I can't do a field update on contact. I can't do a field update on opportunity. So it's only on the object that triggered the workflow rule. You can do an email alert. You can create a task. That is like the one, like, little exception of workflow rules only operating on one object, is you can have a task created from a workflow rule, or you can do an outbound message. So an outbound message is where there is an endpoint defined. It's sort of like a little mini, like, integration, little mini API, where you have a URL and you are going to send that message, which has specific fields, to that URL so that they can be consumed by some other platform. So that's, you know, some limitations of workflow rule. Process builder. Process builder was definitely the first kind of big enhancement for declarative automation that Salesforce released a number of years ago. But again, it still has some limitations, because it really has not been heavily developed upon in a little while. So process builder also can only execute on record creation or record update, and that's going to be an after create or after update. So you cannot trigger a process builder when a record is deleted, for example. That is not an option. They will only execute on a single record at a time. Process builders cannot have customizable error messages. This is something that, when we talk about some advantages of Flow, you know, we have some ability to not share that, like, really awful error message to our users when something goes wrong. Process builders can create records, but they can't like bulk create records, right? So you know, you can't do things like we can do within Flow, like you're running loops and doing actions against a group of records. And Process Builders is a behind the scenes tool. Like it's a tool for admins. It's not a tool for users. There's no UI for the user. And so if we are relying heavily on Process Builders, then we are you know, relying on, you know, fields on records in order to help us accomplish some automation, because there's no way for the end user to have any sort of interaction with that automation like there is with Flow. Any questions, comments? I definitely don't want to just be talking the whole time. Is there anything in the chat?
Not yet, but I suspect there'll be some to come.
Okay, cool. Glad people are enjoying this. This shit's great.
You.
Cool. All right. So in contrast to Process Builder and Flow, like, you know, what can flows do? Like they can do so many things. And this is like not even a full list. This is just like the, I don't know, 12 things that just came to my mind as I was just typing in a slide. So we can look up pretty much any object, and we can look up one record within that object, or we can look up multiple records. We can do what's called a collection of records. So, sorry, was there a question? I heard something. Cool. Okay, so by lookup, I mean within a flow, it's going to be what, you know, your get records action. So you can be like, I want to find all of the accounts that are in Georgia. Like, cool, you can do that. You can look up things like you don't normally see in the UI. Like, I want to look up a custom metadata table. I want to look up the share table for a particular object. Like, you can look up a lot of different stuff within a flow and then use it. So same thing with like create. You can pretty much create any object, and you can create one record within an object, or you can create multiple, all within one transaction. Same with update, and then same with delete. So Flow does allow us to delete records, and it is the only declarative automation tool within Salesforce that allows us to delete. So I think that's really neat. Again, with Flow, we can work with groups or collections of records, and Flow allows us to loop through those records, which means I can have a list of 50 accounts, and then I can loop through those 50 accounts, which means I can look at each one of those accounts individually to see, hey, does it meet certain criteria? Or like I can go through that loop of records. Flow obviously allows us to have we could do a screen flow as a type of flow, which means we do now have a way to present a UI to our end users that they can interact with that automation. We can execute a flow either as a user or as the system. I know back when I had a lot of process builders, a process builder fires as the user, which means if you if your user doesn't have edit access to a field, because maybe like you don't really want them to be able to edit it within the UI, they would still have to, on their profile, have edit access to that field, because otherwise the flow, the process builder couldn't do it. So with Flow, we have the option to execute that flow as the user and respect all of the user permissioning, or we can run it as a system. We can use a flow and we can say that we want it to execute as a before or as an after. So what that means, if it executes before, that means it is before the transaction is committed to the database, and after is basically after it has been saved and committed to the database. So I know a lot of us admins maybe don't totally understand like what a before or what an after is, but this is something that happens a lot that is a big part of being a Salesforce developer is when you're writing triggers, you write them as before triggers or after triggers. And we have that same capability within Flow. There's like so many actions you can take, even within Process Builder. So with Workflow Rule, there was 4, right? We could do a field update, we could do an email alert, we could do a task creation, or we can do an outbound message. With Process Builder, there's a lot more, but it's still, I don't know, like less than 10, maybe, like actions that we can actually execute within Process Builder. But within Flow, like there's just like so many, there's so many standard actions that we can pull from. And then we also have the option for custom actions. And so that's really powerful. And then we will be able to do, again, those outbound messages as part of the winter 22 release. With Flow, we can do a thing called a scheduled flow, which means we want a scheduled flow to run every day at midnight to go and do some action. It does not have to be reliant on a record change in order to launch the flow. We do platform event triggered flows. I think platform events are really neat. I've like gotten super into them over the last year or so. But that is just another option that we can have to trigger a flows when a platform event is received into Salesforce. We can launch sub flows, and then again, there's like so much stuff. Like just like I feel, I'm not going to say the possibilities are endless because, we know that there's always limitations that exist. But it is really hard, I think, to just think about things that like you could not do in Flow. That doesn't mean you always should do it in Flow. Like there's still reasons to maybe use Apex code and things like that, but there's just a lot we could do within Flow.
Yeah, Brenda, thank you very much. I just wanted to add a couple of comments here, and you are going to touch on some of these, I know. While the conversion from process to flow, whether you do it or not, the whole term is a little bit misleading, actually. The way I put it is because before you get started with that, you need to understand a little bit, at least at the basic level, what flows can do. Because the opportunities, like you said, are limitless pretty much. Well, there is a limit to it, obviously, but compared to process, you can do things much differently. So when you're taking your process and, analyzing it and redesigning and then implementing on Flow, you need to understand what your options are. So it's very important to at least go into Flow functionality and understand what is possible, what is not possible. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious if anybody has like any of their other like favorite things that Flow can do that that I didn't list here.
I think it was something I learned, and it's been a few weeks, so of course it's out of my brain now, but something about the way that it handles batches of records. So if you goes and tries to do one update, it like kind of holds and waits to do a DML on, in a certain way. I think in those are trigger record flows. So that's a really cool feature that you don't have to then bulkify your flows like you do kind of with code in a way. So
yeah,
could be wrong, but you guys are the experts, so you correct me. But I thought that was something new that we talked about.
If it's okay if I jump in, if you guys don't mind.
Of course. Yeah.
Something that I just personally love about flows is kind of what you touched on, Michelle, like the pause element, I think is really cool. I've had to use it in my own org for some use cases. That's been awesome. I know that you already talked about it, but like just the ability to kind of, as somebody who's not a developer, to do kind of batch updates and loop through records and all of that, like that is just such a cool piece of functionality. And you talked about scheduled flows, but like the scheduled paths too, of like this happened to a record, but hey, can we wait a couple days before sending that email alert or something like that? Like, I love how you're touching on like flow is kind of like limitless, but I get the point. You can't go around saying that, but it's just so cool, So anyway.
Right, like I mean, it's Salesforce. We know there's limits. Like it's just always going to be a factor. But yeah, I mean, like again, like there's just so much that I I almost forgot about, I didn't forget about that pause element, but I haven't used it in so long. But yeah, like that's just so cool to just be like, you know, like do things and then it's like, just wait a little while and then like do some more stuff. Like super neat. Cool. Anybody else?
I have a question that's a little bit different than what you invited us to ask, but what I'm wondering is, as a developer, I'm very comfortable in Apex and I've used Flows. I'm not as comfortable with some of the newer developments of Flows, but I'm wondering about the time to develop Flows versus Apex. I'm not sure if you have a development background or if you have insight into that, but I'd be very curious into the time to development, the time to develop certain logic across the two different approaches.
Yeah, I don't come from a developer background, but I do have like some thoughts because I work really closely with a colleague and he's, I think like you, like he is much more comfortable in Apex than he is within Flow. And he sometimes like he understands that like we should do things in Flow as much as possible. And like he can totally do them, but I know that he sometimes feels frustrated because it would take him a lot less time to just like write a little class to like do the thing that it would take to build the flow. And so I think, you know, largely that's going to depend. For me, it'd be so much faster to create a flow than it would for me to do the opposite, right? So I think that there definitely is, I think for somebody who's like, you know, super experienced and super quick with just pumping out Apex code, like it does take a little bit longer to just kind of create a flow. And like, you know, some of it can be, I think, a little tedious because you got to drag your thing and then you have to set your conditions and you got to kind of type them in and then you got to do, you know, like it just does take a little bit longer just within the UI to put all your elements together, especially if it's like fairly complex. I think it can just take a bit longer. I think one thing that I have been really interested in is how Flow and Apex can work really well together. So what we have started to do within our org is we kind of have like a Flow first mentality. So we want to do as much as makes sense within Flow. But then sometimes it doesn't make sense to do something within a flow, or sometimes you can't, like if you have, you know, you need to now make an API call to some other, like you can't do that stuff with Flow. And so what we have started doing is really taking advantage of invocable methods. And so we'll kind of start the process, like the trigger is a flow versus an Apex trigger. Like we'll kind of trigger the whole thing within Flow and then do what we can in Flow and then do what we can't do within Flow, you know, pass those things into an invocable method and then execute it with Apex. So we're kind of doing a blended approach for some things.
And can I add to that just a little bit? Totally agree. And one of the things for me, because I'm starting to be a developer, I guess, a beginner developer. So, but one thing I want to caution everyone is look at your team and look who's going to be supporting your org, right? So if you're all developers, you have no admins and you don't foresee admins or something, then yeah, maybe it's more efficient and faster for you guys, you know, your org to have more code than do more declarative things, especially if you're, you know, documenting it well and everyone can just read well, I guess. But, you know, if you do have that mixed team where you have admins and developers, then I kind of lean more towards doing as much as you can declaratively in, you know, what you can do, and then call what you can't do declaratively from that flow or something in Apex, like Brenda said, because then that way you have more people then on your team that can view the work and understand it more likely than someone that's like not familiar with code and then having to try to figure out, okay, and trace code and understand how that goes, because that can take very long then just to fix a simple thing then, or identify an issue sometimes. So that would be my 2 cents. And I do know like there's some stuff, like I had to create an Apex class to do a SOQL query, a specialized SOQL query, because I just really couldn't get that done in Flow. So there are just certain little things and scenarios that you'll run into that you do need to, have some code done.
Thank you.
This is Andy. I just wanted to say this is a great contribution. And one of the areas I would just add, one of the areas that flows can be a little bit faster would be screen dialogues. Probably if you're not doing something very advanced or fancy, the screen flows can expedite the process of development, I would imagine, because I'm not a coder. I do some coding, but the putting things on the screen and develop that is, I would imagine, a little bit more involved on the coding side. So let's move along a little bit with the presentation, and we are going to do questions and answers a little bit more as we go along.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks everybody for your comments. I think this is like a super interesting topic that we could spend a whole day talking about pros and cons of all the things. So awesome. Thank you. Okay. So let's now talk about what would our process be if we decided, hey, you know what, let's maybe consider moving some processes or workflow rules into Flow. So we're going to go into each of these in detail, but I would just say the process that you would use to complete that project is largely going to align to any sort of development process. Your first step is going to be to plan and prioritize kind of what you're going to do. So you want to kind of plan the work and then work the plan. Your next step would be to design. So you want to kind of design what your new flow is going to do and what it's going to kind of how it's going to do what you want it to do. Then you're going to build it, and obviously we want to build it in a sandbox. Then we're going to test, and then we're going to deploy, and then we're going to monitor. So we're going to go through each of these steps in detail. And I think, honestly, the most important is step one, which is to plan and prioritize. So if you decide hey, you know what, I think this might be something we should do, your first step is going to kind of figure out which processes or which workflow rules you want to move to Flow. So again, there's not an emergency. If you have a process builder and it's working great, that's cool. There's no urgency to move that to a Flow. But some ways that you may evaluate your org and decide if these are good candidates to move to Flow. This is sort of when we're evaluating moving processes to Flow. I would say you may want to move to Flow if you don't currently have any process builders or workflow rules on an object, and now you have a requirement, you need to build some automation. Instead of building that automation from scratch on that object in a process builder, I would say just put it in a Flow. Let's just go ahead and make our org as scalable for the future as possible. And I would say just go ahead and start any automation on an object. If you don't already have some, just go ahead and build it in Flow. If you have a need to update a process builder or workflow rule for a new requirement, enhancement, or a bug fix, that might be a good time to, it might take you a little bit longer, but that might be a good time to go ahead and move that over to a Flow. If you have to go and do work on it anyway, maybe it is worth investing a little bit more time up front to migrate that thing over to a Flow. If you have a process builder that is calling flows, it's another really good candidate to say, well, this process builder is launching a flow. Well, maybe we can instead take that auto launched flow in a process builder and turn it into a record triggered flow. Or maybe we can, now with Winter 22, we'll be able to do, what I just call it? Where you launch a flow, a subflow. Subflow. Where you launch a subflow, well, okay, cool. Maybe that's a good candidate to move to Flow. I know for us, like if I have a situation where because of some of the limitations and stuff we discussed earlier with Process Builder, like if you find yourself having to turn off Process Builders because, oh, hey, I need to go and run an update on, you know, some records and it's going to blow up my Process Builders when I do it, I have to turn it off first. Like that might be a good candidate to see if you can rebuild that in a flow in order to enable you to do those bulk operations without hitting governor limits and blowing up your stuff. If your automation is not currently optimized, so I know Salesforce, like, I don't remember what the limit is. I think it might be 50, that you can have like 50 process builders per object, but we all know that's not ideal because like that can get very confusing. Like you can have issues with like recursion and like you don't really control, like you have no control over what order like those process builders are firing, and like it can get really messy. So like if you have a messy situation, taking the time to say, you know what, like we're kind of frequently running into problems, like this might be a really great opportunity to refactor those process builders into, you know, one or multiple flows depending on what your use case is. And then like again, like I really love just the ability that I can better handle errors and issues within Flow than I ever could with Process Builder. So like if you know your Process Builder is, you know, working, but like, you know, maybe, you know, users are doing weird stuff and like you just need better ways to address you know, data or things that aren't exactly the way that your process expects them to be, and you want to better handle those errors and either handle them within the flow or at least provide better error messaging back to your users or even to your admin team. Like this is a good way to address some of those issues. Awesome. Anybody else have ideas of like when it might be, what's a good candidate to move to Flow?
Just a thought. I'm hoping that they make the new Flow orchestrator free, because one of the things that's holding us back, and the reason I'm on here today, we are having a discussion about our workflow rules and process builders and converting them into flows. And one of the things that's holding us back is a lot of our workflow rules are results of approval processes. So they're the end results. So you can't enter an approval process at this point in time from a flow and have it sit for a long period of time and come back to that stuff. So I'm looking forward to that. And I'm hoping that isn't like some sort of major cost add-on.
Yeah, I hope it is as well. We'll see. They kind of, when Salesforce leaves things vague like that, that makes me think, yeah, there's gonna be a cost. Because usually what's free, they'll be like, it's free, and like they really like talk about it being free. But when there's no mention, then usually it means it has cost.
Yeah, I mean, it was shared in the chat. I think there could be a limited free usage. I wouldn't be surprised to see that, because the explanation on the Salesforce's side is they position this as kind of like an approval process on steroids. And we know the existing approval process is lacking behind the other functionality. So they would want people to move off of that. So I would imagine they would probably give that away as a free option possibly, and then charge on top of it. But I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean,
maybe.
just
Yeah,
speculation.
maybe. Yeah, who knows? All right,
We
awesome.
have a new, or I say I'm in a Twitter group that still remains from Dreamforce 2019. And one of the people, Jay Stedman, who's a Golden Hoodie winner, has become a admin for Salesforce, and he's still in the group. And we expressed how dismayed we would be if they charged for it. So we've put the word out there that we don't want that to be happening, but you never know. Because we say we won't be happy, it doesn't mean they'll listen at all.
Right. Yeah. Cool. All right. So once we have sort of identified like one or multiple process builder candidates, sorry, my slide got messed up, of, you know, hey, these are good candidates, and like, yeah, let's go ahead and see if we can move these puppies into a flow. What we want to do is we want to document. So we want to make sure that we clearly document our existing process builders and workflow rules. I can put it in the chat. See if I can do that real quick. I might have to escape. I'll put it in the chat in a second, like a little template that might be helpful to help you document your existing automation. But basically what we want to do is we're not going to fly blind. We want to understand, okay, like I have this process builder on opportunity. Like, what does it do? You know, so kind of go through that process of, you know, what I like to do in the documentation is to like explain it in plain English first, like, well, this process, you know, this does these things. And then go through each individual node and like, what are the criteria for that node? Like, how is it evaluating the criteria? Is it using a formula? Is it, you know, using the criteria are met? Like, is there any logic? And then like, what are the actions? So you want to document your decisions and your actions. And then what I think is really, really important is just because you have an existing process builder and it's doing stuff, does it even still need to do that stuff? So I think a lot of times, like, you know, we build for requirements and then we deliver on those requirements, and then companies change, people change, processes change, and you know, like there may be things, and it's not harming, but like, you know, if you are sending an email alert on a particular action and nobody was reading the email alerts, like you don't really need that notification anymore. Like we don't want to just take something and just move it over just as it is. Like we want to use this as an opportunity to engage with our stakeholders, to reaffirm existing business processes. We want to use it as an opportunity to enhance, right? So are there any issues? Are there inefficiencies? Or like, can we just make this thing better? And like, if you don't already have documentation on your stuff, which is not uncommon, it is also a really great excuse to create that documentation or to update documentation that you might have that maybe has not been kept up to date with each release that you've had. So even if like, you know, you kind of do a lift and shift, like, hey, at least as an output, you will now have really good documentation. So let me see if I can click this template. It's like super basic, but this might be helpful to help everybody. Every company has your own like kind of documentation strategy, but like if you don't have one, I think this is just a really great way to sort of think about it and process it, where, you know, we want to identify like, you know, for each object, like what are the automations that we have? And it's not just our process builders that we want to document, right? We want to be really thorough, and we want to understand, well, do we also have Apex triggers? Like, do we have workflow rules? Do we have existing flows? So we kind of want to understand all of the different types of automation that is happening on our object, because that will really help us to make sure that we are designing things in the best way, and that we don't, you know, create problems in our org that, you know, right now maybe things aren't broken and like they're working okay. But what we don't want to do is like to go, you know, too crazy with it if we don't fully understand all of the different automation that is happening on a particular object. So I'm not going to go through this in detail, but just like your object, like your description of like, what does it do? You know, the details for each step, and then any notes. So this, once you kind of have documentation and have a really good understanding of like what each part of your automation and what it's doing, this would be just a great way that, again, that you could engage with your stakeholders, engage with your users to be like, hey, like this is happening. Like, do you still need this? Like, does this need to be updated? Or are there things that are not currently happening that are still highly manual within your world that maybe we could improve, right? So there's that.
Brenda, thank you very much. I mean, this
Yeah.
is fantastic to because it's sometimes very hard to get ourselves organized and the thoughts and put those on paper. Thanks for this template.
Yeah, you're welcome. So cool. And then I kind of alluded to it before, right? But like your plan, like always should include like, could it be better? So can we, for our end users, right? Could we make this automation even easier by adding some functionality? Can we better alert our users that something has gone wrong? So again, like, can we take that opportunity to provide better messaging to our team members when things maybe don't work or like they've done something wrong? And then there's like technical improvements that we can maybe make, right? So, hey, like, you know, maybe we have something kind of weird in our process builder, like we can't bulkify, like, you know, like let's see if we can fix that. Again, error handling. One thing that I think is really interesting is like, do you have an opportunity to maybe reduce fields on your objects and like transition stuff to a screen flow, or use variables in your flow instead of fields on your object? So like if you have fields that, like I know that in past orgs, like we had like checkbox fields that are like, okay, like ready to do this thing. And like we would trigger a process builder on the checkbox. And it's like, well, I don't need that. Like I'm not reporting on that checkbox. Like I don't actually need that information for any real reason, like for reporting or analytics. I'm like using a field in order to trigger a process. I'm like, well, why don't we just like have them, instead of clicking a checkbox, have them click a button and launch the screen flow and like do it that way? Or, you know, do we have a bunch of like, you know, just formula fields or stuff like in our objects that we needed because like we needed to use them for processes, but like we could instead just like transition those and use them as variables in our flow. So it can be an opportunity to just further reduce like your field utilization if you don't actually need those fields for any reporting needs. Okay. So then you've got your plan, right? Like, you know, all right, we're going to move this process or these processes into flow. You know, we understand like what we're going to do, like what our flow needs to accomplish. We've validated it with our teams and like, now, okay, now we're going to like move on to the next step, which is to design it out. So I like to use a tool like Lucidchart, or let's see if I can find the link. There's a tool, it's free, it's called Excalidraw, which is like a really cool, it's totally free, it's just in the browser, just like little canvas that you can use to kind of sketch things out. You could use like Microsoft Paint, you could use paper and pencil, like it doesn't actually matter. But I do think as you are, you know, transitioning from a process builder to a flow, or even if you're just building a new flow from scratch, like sketch it out. This can save you a ton of time versus like trying to design it directly within the flow builder where you might, you know, come up with some questions or you know, things like that. So you want to kind of figure out what is the type of flow. So are we going to do a record triggered flow? Like, you know, probably if we're moving from process builder to flow, but maybe not. Like maybe we decide instead to, well, let's get rid of, you know, some fields and like, let's do a screen flow. Or, hey, we actually, you know, this would actually be better as a scheduled flow. Like we can just run this thing every night and like, you know, do things versus like waiting for our records to update. So we want to start about the start element. We want to think about, well, is this a before or is this an after, right? So kind of think about what your use case is. Like the main thing is like a before create or a before update is going to be like pretty limited to what you can do in terms of actions, because like really you can only do those things on like the same records you start with. If you need to do anything else with other records, other objects, like it's going to have to be an after. You want to design your flow, right? So just like literally just sketch it out of like, okay, I'm going to have my record triggered flow and here's my criteria. And then what am I going to do? I'm going to get get records, and then I'm going to loop through them. I'm going to do these things. So you kind of just sketch it out just like you were building it. You know, figure out what your decision elements are, figure out what your kind of faults, you know, or any error handling that you need to build into your flow. So, so again, I really like the Excalidraw. It's what I used to make this little diagram. But
Thanks for this. I was looking for something like that.
Yeah, I'm exploring that right now myself. I'm kind of excited. Thank you, Brenda.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of our engineers like was using it. It was like, what is, like, he was showing his screen of like designing some like complicated like event platform, and he like pulled up Excalidraw. I was like, what's that? Oh my god. So yeah, it's a good one. All right, cool. So you're gonna design, and now you're gonna build, right? So let's, like, in your build phase, like basically what you're going to try to do is to move your sketch into the flow canvas. And then, like, as you are building out your flow, right, we do want to make sure that we are avoiding some common pitfalls that, you know, can happen within flow, especially for people who don't come from a development background. You know, these can be mistakes that can happen. So we want to avoid hard-coded IDs within our flow. So, for example, if you are doing a lookup, right, you're doing a get record on your flow, and you're doing that against the opportunity, and you guys have record types, you know, it can be easy to fall into the trap of putting in, you know, your criteria and hard coding that record type ID. So we don't want to do that. You know, the main reason we don't want to do that is because when we move that flow from our sandbox to production, guess what? You know, if it's a new sandbox, that ID may no longer be valid. Like, we just don't want to do IDs. We want our flows to be able to be a little bit more sophisticated. We don't want to do our actions inside of a loop. So if you have done a get records and you're getting, you know, I think earlier I said like accounts, like you got a list of 50 accounts, and you want to loop through those accounts. And for each account that, you know, is in Georgia, then we want to like take some action on the contacts, or, you know, we want to take some action to update a field maybe. We don't want our update record to be in the loop, because what'll happen is we will hit our limits. We'll hit limits within Salesforce if we have too many records within our loop. So we just don't want to do that. We want to take those things out of the loop and then execute them afterwards. AirPod fell out. We want to add decision elements and fault notifications to avoid your flow just like failing or erroring. So things like, if you, again, if I'll use like the example of like a get record. So if I said, okay, my trigger is on account, and then on when an account is updated to meet these conditions, I want to go and do something on all of the related contacts. So like you can imagine a flow that has a record triggered flow that starts an account. And then your first thing that you do within that flow is you do a get contacts, get me all the contacts that, you know, have the same account ID. Well, and then do something on those contacts. Well, what if you don't have any contacts? Then like that would cause your flow to fail. And so we can add decisions that, you know, do the account, get the contacts, have a decision like, where are their contacts? If there are, cool, proceed. If they're not, then maybe we want to send an email alert or some sort of message to somebody to be like, hey, what's up? Like, your account doesn't have any contacts. Like, do something, like add your people into Salesforce. Yeah, so you want to think about things like that. We don't want to always assume that our users are putting data in the system exactly the way that we want them to. And then we want to avoid, it's similar to Process Builder, right? But like, you definitely want to be mindful of like having too many of the same type of flow on the same object. So if you have 10 record triggered flows and they're all on contact, and if any of those criteria overlap, then like you're going to have a problem. So this is where, again, like the new option for subflows within record trigger flows is going to be really helpful, because you can kind of get to a point where you have like a main like handler flow that then is going to kind of control launching those subflows for you. Some tips to avoid hard-coded IDs if you are new to Flow, and you're trying to make a flow and you're trying to set your get record criteria, and like, you don't know what else to do. One thing you can do is you can add a lookup. So you can actually do add an extra get records or lookup to your flow to go and find the record type ID or a user QID, a profile ID. Like you can use the flow to look up what those IDs would be and then store them as variables within your flow, use them in decisions. Another fun thing you can do is incorporate a custom metadata table that you can also, you can do a get records against a custom metadata table if you need to, pull in some variables within your flow. Or one thing, like the architect in me says, like, this isn't like the ideal thing, but if you have a formula field, you can do a formula text field on your object just for like the record type name, and then you can use that in your decision. Just like really can make it easier, and that way you don't have to do those extra get records in your flows. If you do have like we have one object that has 12 record types. It's like, well, I just have a formula field on that record to tell me what the record type name is, and then I can use that in my flow. So cool. Yeah, if there's any questions or anything. Cool. All right, so then our next method, or next step in our conversion process is always going to be to test. So what you can do is, since you did all that good work at the beginning of the process to do all the documentation, you can use that documentation to develop your test scenarios to test out your new flow. So we always want to test both positive scenarios and negative scenarios. So like we want to test things working in the way that we expect. And then we also want to test things working in the way that we don't expect to make sure that our, again, that our flow works the way that we want it to. We want to always have other people test if possible. So if you are a solo admin, this can be really hard. If you're by yourself and you don't have a team member that you can send it over to test. If you're working within a small org, you may not have a dedicated QA function within your company. But if you need to have a user test, like identify a friendly user that you can kind of promote to super user and get them into a sandbox and like have them test things out. Like it's always best to have somebody else test your stuff. I know I'm a terrible tester of things that I built because I know what it's supposed to do. And so I like, not even on purpose, like a lot of times will, I test what I expect and I don't find everything. If it's relevant to your use case, right? Like try testing using a bulk insert. So instead of just testing, like going in and like creating a record and like, okay, did it work? But like, what happens if I load 1,000 records? Like, does it blow up? Like, if that's relevant to your use case, like you do want to try to test that out as well. And the other thing is like not to forget, if your org has, Apex, right? Like don't forget about your test classes. So you can go and you can run those within your sandbox and also run them when you deploy, even though Salesforce doesn't force you to when you're deploying Flow. You want to run those because like you want to make sure that your test classes that exist within your organization like don't start to break now because you've done something different. A best practice, if like you really want to go nuts and you have that developer skill set, you can write your own test classes that are specifically to test things like your flows and not just to get your code coverage for your Apex classes. So you can write test classes as well to help you test your flows and just basically anything within Salesforce. So if you have that skill set, that is a great time to use it. Again, we want to test happy path. So like, user comes and like they do what we think that they should do and like what they're supposed to do and what they've been trained to do. And the records were in the state that we expected and we got the result that we wanted. But what happens when, you know, the user does something weird, they do things out of order? You know, does your flow still fire like it shouldn't have? You know, so we want to try to, you know, we want to test to get the result we want, and we want to test to see if we can, you know, that our negative testing is also valid. Any questions, comments? No. Cool. Okay. So then it's time to deploy, right? So we want to, we can package up our new flows and then any dependent components, and you know, your process builders, like, you know, anything like that, your deactivated ones, your deactivated workflow rules, you can put them in a change set. You know, organizations use different methods for deployment. I know I worked somewhere that used FlowSum. Right now we're using like the plus version of click deploy, which works really well for us. I know like people use gear set. So like whatever your deployment methodology or tools are, like you can get all your stuff together. You always want to validate your deployment to production. So if you have a release process, then, you know, before your release day, like you want to try to validate that deployment to make sure it actually will deploy. And again, it's always a best practice, even if the system doesn't force you to run at least the local tests within your organization, because like, it's just a good idea. When you're in prod, one thing that you have to remember, I say have to, so you might have to activate your flow in prod. I have read that there is a way to deploy your flow like in an active state, but I don't remember how to do it, and I've never done it. I always just deploy the flow definition, and then like my you know, post deployment steps are always like I need to go and activate it. So you might have to go activate your flow. You know, may have to deactivate you know, process builders. There might be other post deployment steps that are needed. So you want to, as part of your deployment process, like you want to kind of have an understanding of like what are those post deployment steps you may need to take. You want to complete post production validation. We don't like to say testing in production, so we'll call it post production validation, which is okay, like it's in production, we tested it in the sandbox, we're pretty sure we're good, but like let's go and kind of, you know, you may not want to do like your bulk insert or bulk update type testing in production, but like create a record or modify a record, like make sure it looks good, and then delete that record when you're done. And then you also want to then announce the release to your stakeholders. So if there are things that you have built that are now like improved functionality or any changes for them, like you definitely want to go through that change management process and make sure that they understand what is now available and how to use it. Even if it was like a behind the scenes, like total lift and shift, I just took an existing process builder and now it's in a flow and like none of the users should actually notice anything, it's still a good idea to have some sort of an announcement to say, hey, we made a change. If something goes wrong, let me know. I know a lot of times like the users don't tell you. So like this is just one way that you can remind them that, like, you know, see something, say something. If something goes wrong, like please tell me, because you know you can't be everywhere at all times, and like you're not a magician to know everything. So that's your deploy. And then once we're in production, now we want to babysit or monitor our flow. So we want to pay extra careful attention to our flow usage, at least for the first couple of days, to make sure, like, yes, like we're totally good. If you can't tell, I'm very paranoid. So I'm always like, okay, like let's make sure and like, you know, be on top of it when I deploy something. It could be really helpful to go ahead and prepare some reports or some SQL queries that you can run periodically to check and try to proactively identify if there's any problems. So this is especially true if your flow has any sort of like field updates or any, record create, those sorts of things that you're expecting to happen. Go ahead and run reports that kind of mimic a lot of your flow criteria, or build some queries and run them. So you can a lot of times identify like, well, this happened, the account status is X, which means this other field should be Y. So go ahead and create a report that says accounts with your filters, modified like since the time your flow is live, and account status is X, and then have account status as Y, and like just look like, okay, are there any records where the my records aren't looking the way that I expect them to since I launched this flow. So that can just be a really great way that you can be proactive and not just like waiting for there to be errors or users to bring issues to your attention.
And this
and
is,
then you can.
sorry,
Go ahead,
Brenda, I interrupted you, sorry. Let me just add one thing. This is also an area that needs improvement, actually. I don't know if everybody's aware, we have very good reporting now on screen flows. We can report on the execution of screen flows, even different screens and how long it took for the user to get from one to another, which is very helpful. But we don't have the same kind of reporting for other types of flows. And we need to be able to see when things got executed and how many times they got executed. Now we have a panel on the automation screen that shows very, very brief information, some information, but you can't really get to the report behind it for other types of flows.
I didn't know that you could run a report on screen flows.
Oh, okay.
So
So
cool.
yeah, I just played with that. When you go to your reports and search for flows under all reports, you'll see it, but it only includes screen flows.
Yeah, that's cool. I did not know that. Yeah, and then there's also the pause and failed flow interviews thing within setup, like that can be helpful. Like when a flow fails, like usually you'll get an email, so like you kind of know about it, but like this can be just another place that you can go and find. I don't have it listed here, but one thing that we have done within our org is we have a scheduled flow that runs every day that goes and looks for records that maybe are like there's some really there's all right, I'm getting an echo really bad. Okay, maybe it's gone. Okay, it's gone. Okay. So we have a flow that runs every day, and like there's certain steps to our process that are just like critically important. So for example, for our work at a school, right? So we have an admissions process. So somebody can go and apply, and we use Experience Cloud for all of that. And when they apply and when their new user gets created, like we need to create an application record and then a series of child records to that application automatically when a new admissions user gets created. So we have that all set up. It works, but like every once in a while, like it won't work. And so if it doesn't work, then we want to fix that because otherwise it impacts their user experience. And so we have a scheduled flow that runs and goes and looks for, hey, do we have any Experience Cloud users in this profile where related to their contact we don't have these things? Like if that's true, then we fire a platform event that is integrated to a thing that's integrated with Slack, and we get notified. So like we have like these different things that we are doing proactively within our flows to notify us like, hey, here's a situation. And then we have a scheduled flow that goes in every day, looks for certain scenarios and just lets us know if those scenarios exist. It helps us identify if we have like some root cause problem. Like if all of a sudden we now have a whole bunch of these issues and like something broke and like we need to go and fix it. It's just like one additional way that we can stay on top of the automation happening within our org and get notified if there's issues.
So you built a platform event triggered messaging, error messaging. That's impressive. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
That's cool.
If you want to learn more, you should come to Florida Dreaming, because that is the topic of our presentation. Cool. And your last step is now to celebrate. So sit back and reflect on what you did, right? So you upgraded your functionality to the latest and greatest. You set yourself up for continued improvements. You documented the heck out of your automation. You built some cool stuff, and you launched an enhancement for your users. So like, Happy says, good job. I think that's it. I'm done. That's all. The end.
Nice
That
job,
was
Brenda.
super cool. Seriously, thank you very much, Brenda. A lot of information to digest. I think I wouldn't be alone to say some of us may have missed some stuff, but we are going to share the recording, so you can go back you can go back to the recording if you like, and then get some of the information from the presentation that way. And I'm going to also try and grab the links from the chat and also share on the YouTube channel, so that you can go back and look at those if you want to do it that way. And I'm going to also share my creation on Accelerator. I just made a flow that I wanted to implement after this presentation. Thank you so much for this tool. This is my new flow that's quite confusing. It loops and loops to infinity. So any questions? Any chats?
Brenda, do you have any kind of like before or after type pictures of like maybe the process builders or workflows you had to, or even a template that you showed, like what you had, what it was, and to what it is now?
I don't have any of that like handy. But yeah, I think for us, and we certainly have not, like, we still have process builders. It's not like we've gone through the whole thing and like we're like 100% flow now. But I think what we were able to do is to identify some processes that just like weren't working the best, and then we also were just doing a really big we had a lot of we've done several like architecture updates this year. So like we've done those in phases of like, okay, like do step one and then and so with each one of those, like we've really taken an opportunity to be like, okay, we're making this change. So like our existing process is going to have to change with it. And instead of like changing the process, like let's just move it to a flow. So it's really been pretty organic. A lot of times like in parallel with other projects that we're working on, and just taking the opportunity to move it to flow. And then with our existing process builders that exist, like what we're doing is like every sprint, just trying to be like, okay, like we have this baby process builder that lives on opportunity. We've got some capacity within our sprint. Like, let's just go ahead and, start the process of moving this thing into a flow, and then going through all of the steps to, validate, like, does this still even need to do these things? Like, are there other improvements we can make? And so we're just like kind of building it into our sprint cadence for the processes that are fine. But like, we just want to kind of continuously try to move things over.
I just kind of thought maybe as like an exercise to people who are new to flows or process builders, or, kind of scared to maybe convert them. Maybe if you guys are in Trailhead and have used a playground or something like that, or have your own developer org where you've, followed around Trailhead and done process builder automations that you have, maybe just taking that org and using like the template you provided us, Brenda, to kind of like, all right, let's practice documenting what we have. And is there any place that we actually can take that information and then maybe start building a flow to just convert all those now that you're done and you earned your points and badges, just a thought.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion of like, finding trails that you've done where you've created process builders and being like, okay, cool, like let's move this puppy into a flow and going through the whole process in a very low risk setting. Okay.
Hey, and just before we go, like something we typically try to do in Salesforce Saturdays in Atlanta is just get everyone's face and do a quick picture to say, hey, we were here and we did this thing. Would you guys be willing to take a group photo real quick if you're still on?
Hey, consider my palm tree my face today. It is too early to be together. You're lucky I have clothes on.
All right, so anyone else going to turn on their videos? Just want to give a minute or so. And if you don't feel like you've been beautified today and don't want to be on camera, then if you have a picture of yourself that you just put as your background instead, that's totally cool too. Okay, cool. All right, so go ahead and do that. What do you say, cheese or Salesforce Saturday, something quick?
Hello.
All right, 1, 2, 3. Awesome. So I'll share that with you guys on Twitter and Slack. And thank you all so much. And I'll turn it back over to Andy and Brenda. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things about the new release, maybe I can mention here, if you haven't had a chance to look at it, because the release is kind of sneaking upon us. For me personally, I didn't really feel like I had enough time to prepare this time around. So the smallest change that's actually a cosmetic change could be the biggest change that you are going to see on your screens, which is the creation of a record triggered flow. The screen is changing completely, and it is a change that's going to make it simpler for the new users, but at the same time, it might surprise you. We used to create a record triggered flow out of our options on our screen, and then after creating the record triggered flow, we used to pick inside the start element whether we want a before save flow or after save flow. Now, this is going to be done in one shot. Once you click on record triggered flow, you are presented a screen where you are going to choose which object you want to run this on, what is the start conditions you want to add, and at the same time, you are presented right on the bottom, two big boxes. The left one says fast updates or something like that, and the right one says process related records. I don't even remember the exact words, but there is a long explanation right underneath it that will help you choose which one to use. And the words before and after are in italic, but at the same time very small inside that long sentence. So if you're looking for a before save flow or after save flow, you're not presented those choices as the bold titles of those boxes. So that's a cosmetic change, but that might surprise you when you first start your record triggered flow once the release rolls in. I just wanted to know that. There are some other developments that we are going to have, but this is not a meeting where we are going to through all of them, but because they are quite many improvements. The one important improvement, again, is we've discussed that today, is around debugging record triggered flows. We were able to debug record triggered flows as of last release, but we did not have a chance of testing when a record is updated condition very well. Now what we are seeing is on the debug screen where we want to debug a record triggered flow, we are able to change field values on the record triggered test record. So once we add the record that we want to test this on, we are able to also change some field values to see what the different outcomes could be. So that's another one. Another good development I shared in the chat window is the possibility to roll back debug testing in screen flows. We didn't have that. We've had that added in different types of flows, and this is the last step. I think we have the ability to roll back the changes in screen flows now as well.